If you think it's time to take a hammer to your bathroom scale and rip up that diet rulebook, welcome to Body Kindness. Hi everyone, it's Rebecca Scritchfield, author of Body Kindness and host of this podcast. I'm a health at every size dietitian, a certified exercise physiologist, a former chronic dieter, and a mom to 2 girls. Join me as I talk to guests about what it means to be good to ourselves and create a better life where well-being matters, not weight. Through these conversations, we'll reveal the challenging and surprising ways our culture keeps us searching for our worth in our appearance. Let's create a new view of health that's inclusive and built on compassion. Let's shake things up a bit and let's change the game. That playful music you were just listening to is provided by Blue Dot Sessions. You can check them out at sessions.blue. And I found this music courtesy of freemusicarchive.org. Welcome to another episode of Body Kindness. I'm so excited you're here. If you're new, I want to invite you to pick up the book, ebook, or audiobook, wherever books are sold. It is a great way to learn more about the practice and philosophy of body kindness and to find meaningful ways to integrate it in your life, especially if you care deeply about your health and well-being, and maybe you're looking to make some changes in life, or you've hit diet rock bottom and you are wanting to make positive changes but break away from the rigid rules of dieting. And I'm also hosting a free book club on my Facebook group. So if you search Body Kindness Insiders on Facebook, you will find that group, and you can catch up with us anytime and join us in on our discussions. We'd love to have you there. That's also the new group for the podcast listeners. So that is the place that you'll want to join and engage in conversations about the episodes and kind of get some support and encouragement from others who are practicing body kindness. If you are thinking about taking your work to the next level and are interested in working with me, there are opportunities for that. So I can work with clients on a one-on-one setting, and I also am running groups. You can check out bodykindnessbook.com/breakthrough to learn more. I'm really excited to bring you this episode with Fiona Willer, and here's a clip so you can learn a little bit about our conversation.
So we can push all of this money that we've got in weight loss innovation towards research and innovation and development of equipment that can actually help people live well in the bodies that they have, whatever sort of diversity they have, maybe size, but also ability. That's where we should be putting our money.
So Fiona is a wonderful registered dietitian, and she practices out of Australia. She's also a university lecturer, and she holds personal values about nourishment and body autonomy. Some of the things that I would love for you to know about Fiona and make sure you check out. So for anyone, no matter where you're at on this journey of health at every size and rejecting diets and diet culture, she has a free email that goes out. I really love this email. You can check it out at HealthNotDiets.com, and you can also like her Facebook page. She's on Twitter at Fiona Willer. And she also has some books. So if you're a helping professional, you can take a look at her non-diet approach guidebooks, and they embrace the health at every size principles for a clinical practice. Fiona is doing PhD research, and she will soon have her PhD. But that was really what helped her cement her resolve that a weight-neutral approach should be part of every clinician's skill set. And she offers workshops and trainings, which you can check out. And I just really love Fiona. You're going to learn a little bit about how we came to know each other at the top of the show. Hey, Fiona, welcome to Body Kindness.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, I can't wait to talk to you. We've been planning this for over 6 months, everyone. It's really quite sad.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's finally happening. Yay.
Better late than never.
Exactly.
So I love to start with listeners, kind of give a little bit of backstory, how I come to know the guest and everything. And so, well, I guess, Fiona, I would say that we came to know each other through Health at Every Size, and in particular, ASDA, Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. We both sat on the board for the same time, right?
We did. Although we came across each other on a very early HAES, Health at Every Size registered dietitian listserv email list.
Were we friendly back then?
5 or 6 years ago, I think. Yeah. Because I remember being impressed by how bombastic you are.
Oh, awesome. Some things never change.
So it's a while.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, I was really resistant to Instagram, very resistant. And then finally I was like, okay, I just got to start posting things. But I have come to love it. And I've come to especially love all of your posts. Like I literally, you're one of the few people that I'll search by name if I'm not seeing it in my thread. I'll be like, what's Fiona posting about? Because I know it's going to be good.
Yeah, I'm newish to Instagram as well, just this year, or 1 year, I guess now. I started in January 2018 properly. And I was pretty similar to you. I was like, I just don't know how to use the thing. And the things I talk about, I didn't think were really very easily an image, you know.
You can't meme it, but you actually meme studies very well.
Well, I mean, I thought, well, this is going to be the learning curve. So I'm just going to play around with this and see how it goes. And I too love it now because it is actually a really great way to communicate science. So, I have had a love affair with Instagram, as have you.
Why don't you tell folks your Instagram handle and then let people know a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is at Fiona Willer, so FionaWiller. And I'm also that on Twitter. And on Facebook, I'm HealthNotDiets Facebook page. And my stuff is really around unpacking weight science and from a health at every size, from a weight neutral size acceptance framework. And so what I do, because I'm a dietitian, an advanced dietitian, and I'm doing my PhD in this stuff, I'm sure I'll talk about that a bit more later, is have a look at the research around human body weight and around human health-related behaviour, lifestyle behaviour and so forth, and look at it not from a weight-biased perspective, but uncovering the gold in there that talks to those underlying things that aren't weight-related. And it's amazing how much weight bias is built into the system. So I really love interrogating these studies to see where the flaws are and being able to show people how to read studies with a much more balanced view, not just this weight bias that we're fed 24/7. So that's really my sort of niche, particularly on Instagram. I want to be able to communicate these concepts and help people to be able to then take that skill and unpack weight science in their own lives and in their own health fields.
Yeah. And it's so important because research is so funny, right? It's this kind of thing that, if it was printed in a journal, it must be 100% true and always true, right?
I know, but when you're actually in the business of doing research, being a researcher, you realize, everyone's just human, actually. And it's the humanness of people. Like, you know, we're interested in studying things because we're individually interested in that stuff, not because there's some sort of like impartial book of facts that we have to fill. All of the questions that we ask ourselves and that we ask in our research are metered by our own personal view.
So it's going to be inherently biased, even if you try to take the bias out of it, and then you add in the bias of just the training and
all the things. And you know, at this particular time in history, the research that we're producing now is different from 50 years ago, different from 100 years ago, because of all the other things that have happened. Like research has to exist in the context in which it was done.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm thinking about another podcast episode where I talked to a historian who did the hard work for us of reading like over 1,400 or even 1,000 maybe like diet texts and then synthesize them. And that was some of what she was educating me on, is that what the texts were really saying and understanding what was happening in the time and how things are, how things have changed. And so how some things relate and are different. So, but I never really thought about that in terms of research evolving as well, but that's true. And the other thing that I remember reading somewhere was that a embarrassing low number of research actually gets read. Like maybe people who read it will skim the abstract, but they're not even really looking deeply at it. It's like, does this agree with my position? Then I'll share it. If it doesn't agree with my position, then I'm not going to share it.
It's even in academia, like we don't get paid to read papers. We get paid to write papers, essentially. We get paid to do research and produce papers. And the reading of it really is very dependent on what I need to know in order to understand the concepts I'm researching and what I need to know in order to be able to write the papers. There's no, there's benefit in terms of I just want to know this stuff if you read it, but that's not really a great incentive for the regular human out there to seek out research articles.
Right.
And so it tends to be used as a grenade rather than as a, improving humanity.
Right. Well, and then there's a whole economic side of it too, right? Because what's going to get pulled is the shocking headline that's going to make media for clicks and likes and ad dollars, right?
Yeah.
And then even researchers or doctors, right? Like they can get big book deals, like 6 figures plus.
Yeah, and they're as human as everyone else. Yeah. And I don't dismiss anyone for needing to put a roof over their head, but there is a lot of exploitative kind of practice in healthcare as well, and writing books that appeal to the populace is one of the ways to do that.
Yeah, and it's going to be in publishing. It is going to be what can sell, and that is not going to change. And it makes sense. But then you can, I guess, it's trying to help listeners make sense of the murky water. I literally on the daily will have a conversation either with a client or I'll be talking to a client's parent. But Rebecca, there are studies that show that excess body fat in this area is bad, and I just don't want my daughter to die, and you can't say that that's bad, and so it's like, of course I empathize as a mother as well. I empathize with the fear, but that's kind of where I want to bring the listener to, is to understand, how does a parent get to that point, that there's this whole system. We need research. Research needs to get funded. There's all these flaws with it, which I'd love for you to summarize. But so from there, but that's our base. And then you take, well, how does it get interpreted? And then it's about money and sales through media, through books. And it makes sense that systems are the way they are, but it also is really scary when you think of how much we trust certain studies as biblical truth,
Yes, indeed. And just the fact that there are so many fabulous studies, really, really well done, beautifully written up, wonderful methodology, all the things that get stuck behind a paywall. And of course, that lack of accessibility to the general man and woman is not, like, that doesn't help communicating reality. And then we've also got GPs and other primary healthcare providers who are literally Googling things, and they're not going to have instant access to that stuff either, or the time to interpret them properly. So we've got this sort of hidden wisdom, even in research, that is stuck behind the headlines.
That's so important to know and understand, just because listeners, they're just trying to make sense of their life and culture. And of course, if you're at all daring to step into body kindness and intuitive eating and health at every size, right? It is literally a risk, and you feel alone and isolated, and you feel that you have more questions than answers. And I think a lot of them center around, but what about this study that came out. I remember recently one of my mentees in my mentor program sent me like the nutrition smart brief, right? Which goes to all the dietitians and whoever else. And it was like she was just questioning and doubting like these first two initial headlines that just seemed to overpromise, like something around like if you just control yourself hard enough and, you know, sugar intake and weight loss, you know, but just stuff that from the headline alone, I'm like, oh my gosh. And the number of consumers who are going to read that layman article and it could cause great harm is really disappointing and troubling.
Yeah. You know what I think the biggest thing is that we have a real discomfort around uncertainty, not just in nutrition science, but in everything. We're trying to make our lives safe, you know, that's probably human drive. And this idea that doing something is related to a particular outcome that's going to be fairly certain that's not backed up by reality. It's a human tendency to want to think like that. But actually all that we can be certain of is uncertainty. And so helping people understand that, you know, these associations between this and that in terms of medicine, in terms of health behavior, in terms of mortality, morbidity, are so, you know, they're there because we're trying to see into the future, but we're actually not very good at that at all. So being sure that we don't know is actually a really important concept.
Right.
At an individual level.
Right. And I bet researchers don't want to say they don't know because they're supposed to be a respected authority. Like you're supposed to have a knowledge and supposed to have a position. And
yeah, you go, okay, well, there's an association between A and B that's quite strong. Okay, brilliant. But then when you look at the individual data points in there, each of those data points is an actual human being with an actual life and who isn't, you know, if they're the outliers, they're not represented in that relationship, even if it's a strong one between that thing A and thing B. And so when we as clinicians are talking with individuals, we can't behave like everyone fits into that strong relationship between A and B. There's so much mess at the individual level that we can't actually ever promise anything. And helping our clients and helping people to understand that, you know, doing one thing or taking one drug or doing the thing is going to 100%, you know, result in something, that is a lie more often than not.
Wow.
Yeah, right. It's hard stuff to swallow.
Yeah. And, you know, and at the same time, if hearing it and kind of helps you put things into perspective, then maybe it can end up being helpful in some way.
I think so. That knowing the uncertainty of life can really help people accept life, I think. You know, I actually think it builds self-compassion. I think it builds unconditional positive regard when you know that all this stuff could happen to you and it's not your fault, you know, and can happen to your loved ones as well, and it's not necessarily their fault either. So we have to take this as part of being a human, that there's uncertainties in terms of what we're going to go through, how we're going to experience trauma, how we're going to experience our lives, our bodies, all the things. So I really think, you know, knowing that it's not something that we can count on can help to us to learn how to appreciate what we do have.
Yeah, I agree.
When we have, you know, temporary, you know, we've got it now, appreciate it now. It may not be forever.
Right. Well, Marilyn Wan on one of her Facebook posts, and I've been repeating it recently, but she talked about, you know, the way I see it, we're all just renting space, you know, like in our bodies and on earth. I was like, that's it. We're a bunch of renters, aren't we? But we think we're gonna, I don't know, be the lifelong, not even lifelong, beyond lifelong homeowners, but that there is a certain temporarily exactly
whatever that word.
We're short timers.
We are very short timers, and even in bodies that are considered healthy throughout the lifespan, we only live until all the bits fall apart. You know, it's not a completely sustainable system that we have rentership of.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to wanting to shift the focus of our conversation. And I really just want to try to fit in as many myths as we can in this like myth busting part of the conversation. But, feel free. I'm just going to kind of throw at you based on some of your Instagrams that I've seen that I know are hot topics. And then I also asked listeners to submit myths that they would like to see busted or kind of get a sense of where the research is. And we'll just kind of see where that goes. How does that sound?
Awesome. Let's do it.
Cool. Well, I have to start with BMI, or what do I call the BS measurement of insanity or something? I forget what I called it in the book, but basically a very uncool thing that some people still actually trust. So, what can you tell us about body mass index?
Well, I mean, the actual equation itself is quite elegant, but it's all of the meanings we ascribe to what those numbers mean. That's total bunk. So the thing that we've tried to do is pin down that a body size has, that a BMI has a relationship with a health status and a relationship with a lifestyle status. But it's actually really, like, it's garbage. And because we know that people who live in larger size bodies who would be classed in one of the sort of higher BMI categories, there's no guarantee that they're living what we would consider to be a less healthful lifestyle than people in smaller category BMI'd bodies. We know that there are tons of smaller people who are sedentary and who don't eat, what the national guidelines consider to be a healthful diet, and there's issues with that in itself. But if we're just talking about things like fruit and vegetable consumption, fiber consumption, that sort of gear, there are almost as many people in a lower BMI category who eat poorly as there are in the high BMI categories. It's so weakly related, it's ridiculous. There is a statistically significant effect, but there isn't what we call a clinical significance. So when we compare let's say the dietary quality of people in the so-called normal body weight category, the overweight body weight category, and the obese body weight category, it's still around 10% of each of those categories who eat according to the guidelines. So hardly anyone. But then the headline is, people with obesity eat terribly. 90% of them don't eat to the guidelines. Okay, but that fails to also report that 90% of people in the so-called normal weight category don't eat to the guidelines either. It's a lot of misreporting, as you were talking about before. Physical activity-wise as well. In Australia, about half of the people in the so-called normal weight BMI category are physically active sufficient for health, and meaning that half are not. And then if we look at the BMI categories of over 30, it goes to about 40% who are physically active sufficient for health. There's hardly any difference, right? If body shape was directly related to lifestyle behaviour, we would have an overrepresentation of sort of better diets in the lower BMI categories and more physical activity in the lower BMI categories, but we don't. So we have to throw out this idea that BMI relates directly to lifestyle behaviours, because you understand how people might think that way, and that we might have done so before we could crunch the data in the way that we can now. But we absolutely have to discard that belief now.
Well, and that is what's so frustrating about it, is how disadvantaged people are with higher BMIs. So whether that's workplace discrimination and even getting interviews or getting jobs and promotions, which affects their income status, to health insurance cutoffs and things, and even like at certain BMIs, like you can't get knee surgeries. They tell you to lose weight first, or
in Australia,
fertility.
If your BMI is 30 or above, you're not allowed to adopt.
What?
It's horrific. I know, utterly horrific. I know. I know. That gasp I've heard a lot of times. That is the current state of play down here.
I mean, that's just mind blowing to me. Like, what does that say about our common humanity or our sanity? Actually, it makes no sense.
Makes utterly no sense. We have a very low rate of adoption in general because
Mm-hmm.
of the way that our sort of family court system and social services works down here. So very few, like, in the low sort of 200s out of the whole country of 24 million every
Mm-hmm.
year, children are adopted.
Mm-hmm.
But still having that as a exclusion
Mm-hmm.
criteria is dreadful, considering our population BMI distribution, which is
Mm-hmm.
fairly similar to the US.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, and
Like if
and
that's not discrimination, I don't know what is, because it certainly isn't based on capability or love
right,
potential.
right. And I just, it's like, I mean, the fact that the original intention was to kind of look at broad brush strokes for population
Yeah.
health, like kind of like a general, let's get a general sense of things, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
remember, it
then
was
it
initially
became like,
insurance
yes, go ahead.
and death. One, weight during adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
and age at death, and height. Weight and height when they're taken together at one point during
Mm-hmm.
adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
and then how old they were when they died. And it was
Mm-hmm.
mostly white men
Yes.
who died during the 40s and 50s.
Yeah. 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 And that's a whole other thing, right? And then you see like BMI, it's like, I mean, in the doctor's offices up until recently in all the Weight Watchers meetings, or I'm sorry, WW. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, in school, not just for nutrition, but becoming a certified exercise physiologist, I'd have to calculate BMI. I've seen parents who sent their kids homework home where their BMI was a math problem in the health text.
So just because we can calculate it does not mean that it actually has any value.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why BMI's ended up so ubiquitous, is because it is both a continuous measure and a categorical measure. So we've got like all of the stats tests we can do, because it will transform itself into both types of measurement. So if you don't get a result using it as a continuous measure, which is, if it's going to be used at all, that is the most valid way, because it is a continuous measure naturally, going from 0 to theoretically infinity. When we slice it up for our own purposes, we're much more likely to get a statistically significant result, particularly if we have the cutoff as BMI 30, because we've got these uneven category sizes then. So if we're doing under BMI 30 versus over BMI 30, under BMI 30, we're sort of going, there's about 10 BMI points there. Over BMI 30, we've got 30, 40 BMI points represented in that category. And of course, those humans in there are going to be a lot more diverse than humans in the other category. And so it's much easier to get a statistically significant result when you compare those two groups. I mean, it's an utterly horrific thing to do statistically in terms of like literally any other health measure. If it's a continuous measure, dividing it into two is usually a really bad idea, but we do it all the time in weight science.
So if I understand what you're saying, is that, say you have a study that comes out and that it ends up making some sort of claim about higher BMI and being bad for somebody's health.
Yes.
That you have to look at how they split BMI, because they could be using it in a way where it kind of fudges the numbers, where the outcome was going to be achieved because they chose to split the BMI versus continuous.
Yeah. You choose, like when you're slicing a cake and it's a decorated cake, you're choosing where to cut in order to maintain the pattern on the top. It's kind of like that from a numbers perspective, right?
Yeah. Wow.
You can slice it to get the outcome that you want to report. And of course, unfortunately, in scientific publication, there is a thing where if your results, what's called null results, no results, negative results, either nothing happened that you thought was going to happen, your hypothesis was not proven, or it was negative, you're much less likely to get that published through the editing sort of system than you are if your results say, hey, this is a thing, look, here it is. And if you've used statistical methods to sort of nudge your data to be able to get that result out of them, then that's another sort of ghost in the machine.
Mm-hmm. And then, so if we think about this as well, the way, just again, following back to the money, but so in the US, the US Preventative Task Force recommends that patients are weighed and their BMI is calculated, and that they're referred to intensive behavioral counseling based off of BMI cutoff. And in our offices, you get weighed before you even see the doctor, even say boo about your current habits. You could be going there for an earache, and they get reimbursed by insurance by doing the weight because it's a screening, and, saying that they talk to you about your quote weight problem.
It's so inaccurate a measure of behavior that it's almost absurd.
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with BMI being used potentially for screening purposes, because there is an association between a higher BMI and some health conditions.
Mm-hmm.
But that phenomenon, to truly accept that phenomenon along the background of utterly knowing that weight control is not a thing that humans can do, even with a great degree of effort in most cases, then what that should do is trigger, yes, a screening, and then, okay, so I'm at a higher risk of whatever, say a certain form of cancer. If I'm at a higher risk of that form of cancer, thank you for letting me know, doctor. What are you going to do for me? How frequently do you want me to come back so that you catch that before it gets too far down the line and I end up with very poor outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to treat that in a way that is superior for my body type? Because I want treatment that's going to be effective for my body.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to treat that now? They are the outcomes of, that's what screening is for, to be able to help with early diagnosis. And diagnosis that should trigger, how do we optimize outcomes for the people who are having these diagnoses?
Mm-hmm.
That's the rational way to treat risk factors. But with weight, we've just got this ridiculous blind spot thinking that it's completely modifiable, and that modifying it is going to mean that that person was, essentially vanishing away that risk factor from ever have happening. And because a formerly larger person is not the same metabolically, because they haven't been the same metabolically as someone who's effortlessly smaller, even if they're matched for BMI, age, and gender. But that's exactly what we do when we ask people to lose weight to reduce their risk factors.
Yeah.
It's like utterly deluded.
It's just wrong.
It is. It's just so unscientific. I can't even.
Yeah. And it's, it's the fact that it's permeated everywhere, and I feel like, okay, maybe people are like, well, there's all the, as long as you're muscular, and as long as, that sort of clarify where that BMI
like
might be okay.
How to interpret BMI handout. The CDC has. If it takes 4 pages to help somebody understand how to interpret it, it's garbage.
Yeah. And yet it's just used everywhere. And I think that, even as individuals, because they get all these messages, and then it's also, it's just another thing. Oh, there's something with you that's a problem. Your body is a problem. There's something wrong here. And it really deflates you for any positive efforts you are making, because it just becomes this other reminder that you're a failed thin person.
Yeah. I've just done a podcast around exactly that on my Unpacking Weight Science podcast, when looking at the definition of whether obesity should be defined as a disease or not. And one of the outcomes of that is papers like the one that I discuss in this podcast that did a survey of a local area. It happened to be where I live, actually, which is what piqued my interest. People's self-reported level of health, which is it is a really valid way of assessing health status. People are actually really good at assessing their own overall global health, and it is related very strongly with actual health outcomes. So they took that and then they looked at what conditions the people had and their BMI, and reported, there were thankfully, far more people reporting themselves in excellent or great health than they had assessed as that based on BMI and based on health status. So they were basically gaslighting this entire study subset of thousands upon thousands of people who were in larger bodies and yet rated themselves as excellent health, and saying that they had a wrong idea about their health status and they need to be told that they're not healthy if they're in a large body. It's like, are you kidding?
Wow.
Unbelievable that is the outcome. Like, this is actually great news that people haven't devalued themselves because of their body size.
Mm-hmm. And they're saying, oh, that you're wrong. You're wrong for respecting yourself.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Incorrect. I wish I could remember the words that they used, but they had an incorrect perception of their health status, essentially, were their conclusions.
Wow.
I'm like, that is a direct outcome of labeling everyone with BMI of over 30 as diseased, because then health, as you were saying before, health is inaccessible. Then this idea of health or being healthy is a thing that somebody with a BMI of 30 is now no longer able to have in the places where it's been deemed a disease status. And that's appalling.
Yeah.
Because that actually causes worsened health in people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The experience stigma, and then the decision to avoid the doctors because you don't feel like getting bullied.
Yeah. If they're either avoidant or they're overserviced. So they're wasting health care money in these ineffective treatments for a condition that doesn't exist.
I'm just going to say, searching for a problem that's not there.
Yeah, I mean, great. Marketing 101. Can we not do it in healthcare, please?
I do want to move on, but what I wanted to say as the last word about BMI as well is that I'm sure there's somebody who says, but I've seen some really large people, in a wheelchair, difficulty walking. You can't tell me that could be good. And I think that it is worth acknowledging that, like, when you do look at, if you're talking longevity and population, and even when you correct for real factors like socioeconomic status and racism and education level and where a person lives and their access to resources, if you fix for all those things, it's still the extreme. So like the extremely high BMI and extremely low BMIs are the ones that are most associated with chronic disease risk or weight-related earlier deaths. And so the point is that there's a lot of diversity that's not in those extremes, where there could be correlations. That doesn't mean causation. I don't know if you want to explain any of that or just sort of wrap up BMI by acknowledging any of that with me.
So, I mean, even if in some, like, my interpretation is that it's probably all of those things. I guess there's a statistical association. For some individuals in there, perhaps weight gain has worsened whatever risk. And perhaps that weight gain wouldn't have happened if they'd lived at another time in history. And for others, it's going to be the opposite, in that there's some metabolic process going on that's driving both weight gain or sustained high weight and whatever issues that they're having that may or may not have happened at any other time in history. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When we get to an individual level, though, what that individual needs is care that's based on their individual needs. So we can spend 1,000 years pontificating about this and that in terms of, trends. But as healthcare professionals, those buts around the people who live at the sort of extremes of that particular marker, that their cases need to be cared for individually. It's sort of none of our business as well, but is our business to advocate that they receive care that is going to be optimized for the bodies that they have. That they need to be cared for with equipment that suits their body, not that doesn't, and then have the healthcare providers frustrated that the equipment doesn't work. So we can push all of this money that we've got in weight loss innovation towards research and innovation and development of equipment that can actually help people live well in the bodies that they have, whatever sort of diversity they have, maybe size, but also ability. That's where we should be putting our money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. All right. So we're going to move on with some other myths, clarifications type thing, and we'll just kind of maybe hit some top line points to just try to see what we could fit in. So I'm looking at one of your Instagrams. I remember I shared it like immediately because, and actually this is one of those studies that got a lot of press. So it was the low carb diet versus low fat diet for weight loss.
Oh, yes.
So the headline versus the detail, and you taught me all about the waterfall plot. So what can you tell us about this stuff?
My favorite plot of all plots. It's the one I love because individuals get a say, you know. So in this study, they pegged a low fat diet against a low carb diet, trying to be, you know, the one study to rule them all, as you said.
And one of these is going to result in lasting weight loss. It has to.
Right, exactly. And theoretically, these diets were meant to be ad libitum. So people were supposed to eat to the style of it, but not necessarily, they're not following a meal plan. So sort of flexible dieting, I guess. But the trouble is they were logging their carbohydrate intake. And in things like MyFitnessPal or any other tracker, you see the calories as well. So these were not people who are out there living in the free society, freely eating without hyper focus on their intake, even though that's what the paper gave them the impression that the participants were doing. Anyway, so they did this. Can't remember how long the intervention was, maybe 6 months with a 6-month follow-up. Anyway, they found that each group had the same average weight loss, give or take, which was about 5 kilograms, I think, in the time. Now, the important thing, the beautiful thing about this study was that they published their waterfall plots for both of the study arms, the low carb and the low fat. And what a waterfall plot is it shows every single participant, so each individual human in that study gets a line for themselves, which shows their weight at the weight change at the end point. And then it's lined up in order. So those people who lost the most weight appear first, and then on and on and on and on and on until those who didn't lose any weight, and then those who gain weight. So you've got this beautiful graph there that actually shows what really happened. And you can compare your sort of average weight loss, which is the average of all of those lines, to the actual granular detail of what happened with each of those humans in there. And their waterfall plots, those two arms were virtually the same as well, because human bodies do what human bodies do, and that is some human bodies, when you put into an intervention like that, do lose a lot of weight, and others lose some, others again gain some, and then you've got this dropout, so who knows what happens to them. And you can see there that the average, that 5 kilo average or whatever it was, is really because of these super responders pulling down that average. Most people lost in the realm of sort of 3 kilos, but they were a huge chunk of them who gained weight and who left the study, so who knows what happened to them. And I would think that most of those people who lost the 3 kilos are thinking, why did I just spend the last 6 months doing this? So that's the beauty of this waterfall plot, is you can see all that detail there.
Well, and the thing that really bugged me about the headlines, and I even listened to the researchers on podcasts, there was still very much this push and this conversation about like, you can lose weight and here's how to do it. And even a dismissal of those who gained weight of, well, they must not have had good self-control. Like, it's really fascinating, you know, and again, you see what gets published in a paper, but then you also listen to the researchers in interviews, and it's just a way that you can explain away, you know, that people respond differently to different eating patterns, and not everybody is going to lose weight, even if they all do the same thing generally.
Yeah. And the thing is, these are all individual humans. So we don't know that some of those super responders weren't like on liquid diets and saying that they were doing the whatever dietary protocol they were meant to do. And if they're measuring fidelity to the study protocol using weight change, that's crap, because weight does not reflect health behaviors directly. They're wanting to measure fidelity. They need to actually see whether the person was eating the way that they said they were eating, and whether they were eating to the plan they were given, and whether they were moving to the plan they were given. You know, that the fidelity as measured by BMI is hopeless. If you see that in a study, you need to reject the study outright. They've not measured fidelity properly.
Or infidelity. Just kidding. Okay, so I want to move on and ask about, basically, we know that people at higher weights get denied necessary joint replacements, even though people at lower weights get them approved all the time. And I don't know if it was a comparison between how they healed, and basically the higher weight people healed fine. I'm just kind of pulling out of random memory. Does that ring a bell?
It does.
Okay. So what can you tell me?
It was hips, hip replacements, which, you know, the thing about hips is that they are replaced more. You know, there's more people who have hip replacements because they've broken them, you know, then they have to have a hip replacement, whereas knee replacements tend to be more elective. So there's that. But so on the context of that means, though, that we have hip replacement data that does cover a broader swathe of the BMI span, because of that necessity of having to replace the hip when it literally breaks. So anyway, this study, it was a systematic review and meta-analysis of outcomes of higher weight versus lower weight after hip replacement. And they found, although people in larger bodies had a slightly higher rate of superficial infections, so just like literally infections on the skin near the surgical site, there was no difference in the rate of deep infections, which is the bad one. You know, that's the one that leads to sepsis and death. No difference between higher weight and lower weight ones for that. And in fact, people with a higher body weight wore out their new joints less than people with a lower body weight. So they were, you know, they had to have less revisions of the and less, again, replacements of the appliance. So, you know, with joint replacements, we've got the attitudes of the anaesthetist towards body weight, and we've also got the attitude of the actual ortho surgeon towards body weight. Those two gatekeepers are the ones that really are responsible for the discriminatory treatment of people in larger bodies in terms of joint replacement. And there's a lot of talk in anaesthetist circles now, you know, around that a higher body weight's not necessarily, I mean, we operate on people who are very health compromised in other ways, and it's not an exclusion for them. And really it's mostly a matter of being able to plan the treatment that they're going to give in the time. So they need a little bit more time to plan. They need to have the equipment that's appropriate for that body there. And then the outcomes are just as good as with smaller bodies. But you don't want to have an anaesthetist who's not skilled in working on larger bodies. You want one who can do that and has extra training.
Right.
And same with the ortho. You know, the actual skill of the surgeon, we know with other surgeries, is so important. You don't want someone who doesn't know what they're doing with a larger body working on you. That's really where,
and that shows a flaw in who gets into medical school and who gets into surgery. You know, I heard surgeons are like that whole thing is brutal. So, you know, that there's a whole slew of problems that are the real problems, not an individual body who needs a hip.
Oh, and you know what? It just drives me crazy. Like in medicine, things that are hard are hero makers. So operating on a baby while it's still in utero, that's hard. We didn't not do it because it was hard. And the people who, and open heart surgery, those things are hard. We still did them because it's the right thing to do. And yet operating on a larger body is, you know, the door is closed apparently because it's hard, right? It's like guys and girls. You know, something being difficult is not a reason to not do it in medicine.
Amen.
it's fat phobia that is what's impacting on the sort of this appraisal of why we do things.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make, there is a huge fat community out there who would make heroes of medicos who are innovative in helping their bodies stay healthy at the size that they are. They're just waiting for people to do it.
Right. I want to move to IVF and higher weight. I know that you reposted someone else's post, but I've got lots of counseling experience with people who, we struggle to find a fertility center in DC who will even see them. So what's the bottom line for that one? Is it dangerous to do IVF in higher weight people, or is this it's kind of like the fact that they're having this as a cutoff isn't necessarily supported by the science?
Well, the cutoff is clearly based on wanting to have nice numbers so that they can market their service. I mean, that is totally clear. And I've read papers by people in the fertility field who agree that's why those BMI cutoffs are there. Because, infertility occurs across the BMI span as well. And the danger part is this future birthing danger. It's not the actual danger of the procedures that they have in IVF. Mm-hmm. There's very little difference in terms of actual danger to any of the people participating in the IVF treatment at any weight. It's this sort of future fat fear that's stopping the access to that service. And it is weird because IVF providers aren't necessarily also the obstetricians who are going to deliver the baby. It's different. So, they're really just, they want to pick a client that's going to give them good numbers. And unfortunately, one of the ways that they do that is to turn people away at the door without even testing them for, it could be something very simple that's stopping their ability to fall pregnant.
Wow.
I totally, yeah.
I have 2 kids. They were easy, and I'm so grateful for that. And I just know, how many people really want to have a family, and it's hard enough, but to add in, it's just another turn in someone's life where they're going to get rejected and shamed and belittled just based on their size, regardless of what is going well in physical and mental health. And the
other thing
so
with
rigid.
IVF, particularly if the clinics that are local to people trying to access them in larger bodies, if they've all got a BMI cutoff, and this is before that they've had any sort of functional testing at all, they've had GP screens, but that's about it. If they're told, right, you need to be a BMI of this, they go away and spend 6 months, a year or whatever, desperately trying to get into that BMI, that decline in fertility in the year that they've gone and starved themselves could easily override any benefit, if there is one, around body weight difference.
Wow.
But, given a particular age, you don't really seek out IVF services until you've got enough money to do so, and until you're you tend to be older already. And so you're already in this window of fertility decline because that's how, unfortunately, bodies work. It's unconscionable that we would send people away to waste away that time that could be spent trying to get pregnant at the size that they're at.
Wow.
Dislike. It's terrible. It is utterly terrible. And particularly, it's tempered here by that adoption thing that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. So women here who want to get pregnant and who are struggling with infertility and then who don't end up getting pregnant by themselves also cannot access adoption.
Yeah.
Just so wrong.
You're leaving them out altogether.
Yeah. And it's not right. These people, they're friends of mine. They have value and they make fantastic parents, and they should be given that opportunity. It's not fair that they're not.
No, not at all. Wow. There's so much more to say.
Oh, I know.
Thank you so much. And I just want to remind the listeners again that there's so many awesome things. I mean, following you all over social, but also the HealthNotDiets Digest is really, really helpful.
It's free.
And it's free, which is so generous. So generous. Yeah. And anyone, like you're going to get a benefit. You're going to get awesome headlines. You're going to get things you want to share on social media. You're going to get educated. And then you also have a Patreon for your podcast. And is that something that even if you're like, even if you're not a health pro, you might find interesting? Like you could still subscribe to that?
You could, yeah. So the project is called Unpacking Weight Science, and it's a really low-cost monthly Patreon. It's only $5 a month. And I pitch it so that when I'm doing the things, my audience I think about as health professionals and interested lay people. So the health professionals they've got the audio, the podcast bit, and access to professional development supporting materials that include a self-test quiz and further reading and stuff if they want to use it for their professional development hours. And for the lay people who are reading it, they can do that there for their own interest as well. But it's not overly, I mean, the concepts are technical, but I make sure that I try to communicate it in a way that's quite accessible because I know that I've got dietitians listening, I've got psychologists, I've got GPs, I've got social workers, counsellors, health coaches. There's a whole broad swathe of people who are in the audience. So with the audio, I really try to make sure that I keep an eye on communicating these quite complex ideas, but in a clear way.
That's awesome. Well, and I know there's lots of nerds, science nerds who listen to Body Kindness, so they'd be a great fit for that. And then you also you have books for dietitians for a non-diet approach. I bought those years ago, right? Are you still selling those?
Yes, yep, they're still available. There's one for dietitians and there's one for psychologists and counsellors.
Cool.
And they're a how-to guide. Pick it up, read it, and actually use it in clinic type of guidebooks. And also in Australia workshops for health professionals to apply this stuff to their day-to-day work with clients. So, yeah, my whole life is sort of education about this stuff now and research, PhD research.
Yes. I can't wait to call you Dr. Willer.
Oh, I cannot wait to be called Doctor. It's by the time I finish at the end of this year, it'll be 8 years.
Ooh.
I keep having babies.
Yeah. Well, I keep in the back of my mind, it's like, you can always go for your PhD at some point.
Yeah.
But we'll see. It's like one of those heavy, hums.
Good.
Yeah, I know. And that's the thing. I'm like, I love school. I always love school. But now I'm enjoying teaching my girls. Yeah. Well, that not. And my school is my podcast, but also just teaching my girls like math and science. They're at great ages for that curiosity. And so I'm just like, you've got other things to do. The PhD can wait, but so I'll make sure to include all your links in the show notes and so appreciate you coming on and talking to me today.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.